The United States says that AFRICOM, United States Africa Command, is in Africa to help keep the continent safe. They claim that their mission is to stop terrorism, train African soldiers, and bring peace. But if AFRICOM has been in Africa since 2007, why is terrorism still growing? Why do some African leaders believe that AFRICOM is making things worse instead of better? In this video, we will explore the real purpose of AFRICOM, the secrets behind its mission, and why some African countries are rejecting it. Let's begin. What is AFRICOM? AFRICOM, or the United States Africa Command, was created in 2007 under President George W. Bush. The U.S. government said it was built to help African countries fight terrorism, train African armies to be stronger, support peacekeeping missions. At first, AFRICOM said it would not have military bases in Africa, but soon, the US started building secret military sites across the continent. Today, AFRICOM has many bases in Africa, including in Niger, Somalia, and Djibouti. But the question is AFRICOM really helping Africa, or is it just serving US interests? The hidden agenda of AFRICOM. Many African leaders believe that AFRICOM is not really about fighting terrorism. Instead, they think the US is using it for three main reasons. 1. Controlling Africa's natural resources. Africa has huge amounts of gold, oil, uranium, and other valuable minerals. The US does not want China or Russia to have more influence over these resources. By having military bases in Africa, the US can protect its own business interests. 2. Expanding US military power. The US has military bases all over the world. Some believe that AFRICOM is just another way for the US to increase its global power. Instead of helping Africa, they might be using it as a strategic location for their own goals. 3. Controlling African politics. Some African leaders believe that AFRICOM is used to influence politics. If a leader refuses to work with the US, they might face pressure, sanctions, or even military action. This makes it difficult for African countries to make independent decisions. If AFRICOM fights terrorism, why is terrorism getting worse? AFRICOM says its mission is to stop terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and ISIS in Africa. But after more than 15 years, terrorism has not decreased, it has actually spread to more countries. For example, Mali had very little terrorism before 2012, but today, jihadist groups have taken over large parts of the country. Burkina Faso and Niger are also facing increasing terrorist attacks. Somalia has had US military operations for years, but Al-Shabaab is still powerful. If AFRICOM has some of the world's best military technology, why haven't they stopped terrorism? Some experts believe that AFRICOM is not in Africa to solve the problem but to keep it going. The more chaos there is, the more excuses the US has to stay in Africa and expand its influence. The role of France and the US in Africa's conflicts. AFRICOM is not the only foreign military power in Africa. France also has a long history of military presence in West Africa. For years, France has controlled countries like Mali, Chad, and the Central African Republic through its military operations. But African people have started protesting against France, saying that French troops are making things worse, not better. In 2022, Mali and Burkina Faso told France to leave, and now they are turning to Russia for security help. Will African countries also tell AFRICOM to leave next? African leaders who reject AFRICOM. Not all African leaders support AFRICOM's presence. Some believe that Africa should take care of its own security instead of depending on foreign powers. One of the strongest voices against AFRICOM is Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré. He believes that Africa does not need foreign military bases. AFRICOM and France have failed to stop terrorism. African nations should train their own armies instead of relying on the US. Other leaders, like Mali's Assimi Goïta and Guinea's Mamadi Doumbouya, have also spoken out against foreign military control. More African countries are following their example, demanding that foreign armies leave the continent. What happens when Africa says no to the US? History has shown that when African leaders try to reject US military presence, they face serious consequences. For example, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi tried to make Africa more independent. The US and NATO later supported a war that removed and killed him in 2011. Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe refused to follow Western economic policies. The US and Europe placed harsh sanctions on Zimbabwe. Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso was a strong leader who rejected foreign influence. He was assassinated in 1987, and many believe foreign powers were involved. So, will leaders like Ibrahim Traoré and Assimi Goïta face the same challenges for rejecting AFRICOM? Is AFRICOM conducting secret operations? There have been reports that AFRICOM is involved in secret missions across Africa. Some believe that the US military uses African countries for testing new weapons and technology, trains special forces to control African leaders, carries out drone strikes that sometimes kill innocent people. If AFRICOM is really in Africa for peace and security, then why do they keep so many secrets from African governments? Many people now believe that AFRICOM's true purpose is not to help Africa, but to serve US interests. The future of AFRICOM in Africa. More and more African countries are now questioning the role of AFRICOM. Some experts believe that more African leaders will reject foreign military control. The US may try to use pressure to stay in Africa. Russia and China will become stronger allies for Africa. If more countries remove AFRICOM, Africa may finally take full control of its own security. But will the US allow this to happen? Finally, AFRICOM came to Africa claiming to fight terrorism, but over 15 years later, the continent is still struggling with violence. Many African leaders believe AFRICOM is not here to help, but to control. Terrorism has actually grown since AFRICOM arrived. Countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are rejecting foreign military bases. The US may not leave Africa easily, as it has big interests in the continent's resources. So, the big question is, should African countries continue working with AFRICOM, or should they tell the US to leave? What do you think? Is AFRICOM helping Africa, or is it making things worse? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more discussions on Africa's future.